Good Erev Shabbos, everyone. Erev Shabbos, Parshas, Vayechi, Shabbos Chazak, the end of Sefer Parshas for this year. And I have a very interesting question for the Olam to share at the Shabbos tables. And it's in the end of the third Aliyah in the Parsha, where Yaakov is Shchiv Meira, as Unkula says. He's on his deathbed, literally. And he's giving brachas. He's giving brachas to his two grandchildren, Ephraim and Menashe. And he's giving brachas to his children, to the Shiftei Ka. He tells Yosef that after he benches Ephraim and Menashe, he tells Yosef that Hina Anochi Meis, I am going to die. Hashem will be with you, and Hashem will bring you back to Eretz Yisrael. The way Onkelos understands, I'm giving you, says Yaakov to Yosef, I'm giving you one portion more than I'm giving your brothers. So all the brothers, everyone's going to get a portion in Eretz Yisrael. I'm giving you something special, Yosef, something extra. That part of Eretz Yisrael that I took from the hands of the Moirim, Becharbi, simple taich, the simple understanding, Becharbi with my sword, Uvakashti with my bow. There's a bow and arrow, right? So the bow is the bow and you have the arrow. So Yaakov is saying, I took this portion that I'm giving to you, I took it myself, Becharbi with my sword, Uvakashti with my bow. Stam interessant that he's referring to it as his bow. We would say with my sword and my bow and arrow. And really the arrow is the ikr. Of the bow and arrow, I mean, you need both. Without the bow, I guess you could throw the arrow, but if you want it to be most effective, you have to have the bow and the arrow, but he says Bekashti. So Onkelos is metargem, Becharbi uvekashti does not mean literally with his sword and with his bow, says Onkelos, Betsloisi uvevausi. These are two words that describe tefillah, prayer, davening. Slusi is a tefillah. Ba'usi means like a request, to ask, to request something. So the question is, what are these two types of tefillah? That's the question I want you to pose at your Shabbos table. Onkelos is saying that Yaakov is not saying that I got this land through my war strategy. I got this land through my tefillah. But for some reason, Yaakov says my two parts are two different types of tefillah. Becharbi is slusi, uvekashti is va'usi. What are these two types of tefillah? That's the question to ask at the Shabbos table. So the Meshech Chachma answers this question. And he says, slusi is the seder tefillah hakavua, is the standard davening. The davening, the Shemona Esrei, the Anshe Knesses HaGedolah, the 120 tzaddikim, mehem neviim, prophets were among them, that they instituted the 18, we have a 19 bracha tefillah that we say 3 times a day. That's the Seder Tefillah HaKfua. Uva'usi, the keshes, the bow, that's ba'usi in Aramaic, is referring to hubakasha. That's a simple request. Asher amru im ratza adam l'chadash b'tfilas, if a person wants to introduce a personal supplication in his tefillah, me'ein kol bracha, as it relates to the specific bracha that he is davening, he's davening for parnasa, he'll throw it in, please let me get that raise. He's davening for refuah, and he throws in, please let my friend have a refuah shlema. Shoyel adam tzrachav, you can do it. You can add it into your tefillah. So what's the nafkamina whether I'm davening a tefillah kavua, excuse me, one of the standard Shemona Esreis, or I'm davening my own little supplication? What's the nafkamina? Ki seder tefillah shazu avoda kavua. The seder tefillah is a set service of Hashem. Ein hakavana ma'akiv. A person does not have to have the same level of concentration, of intention. In kivein levava ba'avoy sagi, as long as one has kavanah of pirush hamilim, he's standing in front of the king, as the Rambam says, the famous Reb Chaim, in the first bracha of Shemona Esrei. The rest he's fine. With the kavanah mu'et sagi, it's enough with a small amount of kavanah. Person doesn't need to have such kavanas for the entire Shemona Esrei. because Chazal instituted this tefillah. It has a life of its own, as the Nefesh HaChaim in Shar Beis explains, in Perek Yud, Shemona Esrei, to an extent, has a life of its own. I say the words, and it has an effect. Lo Kein B'Chiddush, that's not the case when the Yid comes with a broken heart and davens to Hashem about a particular issue he's having. When a person's come to ask his needs, he's being mechadish in tefillah, that requires more of an intention, more of a kavanah. That's what the Meshech Chachma says. Says the Meshech Chachma, hine cherev, a sword, hu ba'atzmei mazik. This barzel, iron that has a chidud, that's sharp. Sharp iron can kill b'kol shehu. If Reuven kills Shimon, in Jewish law, theoretically speaking, he's liable death penalty, right? But the Rabbanim have to figure out, did the whack that he gave him, was that really a deadly whack? Or did he die for some other reason? So if someone kills someone else with iron, with barzel, there's no shear. Barzel, even a kol shehu, iron, an iron sword can kill. You don't have to see, was it sharp enough? Was it heavy enough? It's memis b'kolshu. In tzarich oimid, you don't have to try to figure out and estimate if the blow that he received, did he die from that blow or was it something else? But keshes, think about the bow, ba'atzmai einei mazik. The bow itself doesn't cause damage. No one ever died from a bow. Let's hit the guy over the head with it. You don't die from a bow. Rakoyach hamoira. It's the person who's shooting the arrow. It's the arrow and he pulls back. The deadliness of the bow does not depend on the bow. It depends on the shooter and on the arrow and on how far he pulls it back. Therefore, tefillah is called charbi. The tefillah kavua, the Shemona Esrei, is the cherev, which can kill on its own. She'af b'lo kavanah ruba. So the tefillah is without serious kavanah. To kill with an iron sword is without serious kavanah. It happens by itself, almost. Uva'usi b'shem kashti. And a person's personal supplication, that second type of tefillah, is described as kashti, as my bow. Shehi k'may keshes, that the tefillah, that tefillah serves as the bow, that it depends on the archer. It depends on the person who's shooting the arrow to determine whether it will be deadly or not. Shehi eid ad shemesim nafshe b'kapa. It's until the person does his own tefillah. That's why he says, Kriya Shema Lamita, the Gemara Bracha says, it's like you're holding a cherev shtel shtei pipiyos, because a tefillah, Kriya Shema Lamita is a tefillah kavua, it's like a cherev, it's like a sword. And the kashti, the bow, is the personal supplication. So we see here a very chashuv yisoid. We see a couple of chashuv yisoids from this Meshech Chachma from the pasuk. We see number one that Yaakov attributed his victory not to his literal sword, his literal bow. Yaakov Avinu attributed his victory to his tefillah. We have to realize that what protects us is not our hishtadlus. We must do hishtadlus. We have to put in the effort. But what really protects us is our tefillah, is our Torah and mitzvahs. That's the real protection. There's a story with the maskilim, the Enlightenment in pre-World War II Europe. They put on a whole show making fun of the Torah, which is what they did. And when the Jews go out to battle, so there's a whole bunch of people that get exempt. All the men who are eligible come to the field, and this is the end of Dvarim. And the Kohen Mashiach Muhammad says, whoever just got married, you go home. And whoever just built a house, you can go home. And whoever just planted a vineyard, go home. And whoever's afraid of their Averis, whoever's afraid that they've sinned and therefore they won't be effective in battle, can go home. So the Maskilim put on a play where they had all these men, these very strong men there, and all of a sudden, one by one, each time, the Mashiach Muhammad, the Kohen, said, if you're this, you can go home. If you're that, you can go home. Slowly but surely, everyone disappeared. If I'm not mistaken, the only two left back, I think Taka, were the Meshech Chachma and Reb Chaim Oizer. I forgot who it was. The Meshech Chachma and someone else were the only two people left back. And the joke was, so they're going to win the war. I mean, come on. They're making late sonas of the Torah, a horrible thing. But said, maybe it was the Meshech Chachma, maybe it was Reb Chaim Oizer. He said, no, they're not making fun of the Torah. Really, that's what happened. When the Yid went out to war, Anyone who was scared of the Aveira Shabiyadai, he went home. Because it's not the sword or the tank or the missile that wins the war. You have to have the sword, tank, and missile. But that's not what wins the war. What wins the war is the tefillah. Like Yaakov Avinu was telling us. The joke is, though, or the truth, I should say, is that the Meshech Chachma and Reb Chaim Oizer could defeat any other army. In Achinami, all the Rishonim would leave, all the Avaryonim would leave. You'd be left with the feeble old tzaddikim with their canes. But the emes is they would win the war. That's what Yaakov Avinu was telling us. B'charbi v'kashti, b'tzlusi v'usi. I want that land that I'm giving you now, Yosef, with my weapons. What were my weapons? It was my tefillah. That's point number one. We have to realize what affects what goes on around us. It's definitely not watching the news, that's for sure not. But it's not even the protection that we put up for ourselves in the ishtadlus. We must do the ishtadlus. We must protect ourselves. But it's the tefillah that really protects us. And number two, these two types of tefillah. The amazing chashivas of tefillah kavua, the chazal, the anshe, knesset gdoila, instituted, as Reb Chaim Volozhin is myrick in that Nefesh HaChaim about the koyach of each word, that it has a life of its own and it accomplishes so much. And the importance of davening b'tzibur. That tefillah is meant to be davened b'tzibur. If a person wants to protect himself, tefillah b'tzibur is the way to do it. Olam hafucha yisro isi. That's the way to do it. And the importance as well of ba'usi, which is that personal supplication. We have to daven in a way that we are being mechadish in our tefillahs also. In the Shemona Esrei, maybe not as much or not at all, but on our own. But in that tefillah, in that personal tefillah, we have to put our entire hearts, into our entire soul, into that davening with the kavanah. We should all be zoicha to, number one, gain this perspective on life, where we see that what wins wars, it's the tefillah. It's the davening that wins the wars, with all the other effort that we put in. To appreciate as well the chashivas of Shemona Esrei, as the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah Mesakin instituted, and the koyach, unbelievable power that tefillah has, especially when it's done b'tzibur. And the importance of ba'usi, the importance of tefillah, our own supplication, but to be careful with our own supplication to make sure that we have that proper kavanah. Wishing everyone a wonderful Shabbos.